We're in the book of Proverbs. Last week, I was hoping that Jerry would show a video, but in his contract, anything outside of his iPad, he won't do. So, but we're going to see that video today. There's a great source called the Bible Project, and I, like anything else, I won't endorse it 100%. We keep looking for something wrong with it. We haven't quite found it yet, but we're certain they're not as right as we are. But this is a video that they've produced on the book of Proverbs as an introduction. It's about 7 or 8 minutes. Let's watch that now, and then we're going to talk about chapter 1.
The book of Proverbs. The word proverb typically refers to a short, clever saying that offers some kind of wisdom, and this book has a lot of those. But they're almost all in the center section of the book, chapters 10 to 29. But there is way more going on in the book of Proverbs, especially at the beginning, chapters 1 through 9, and the conclusion, chapters 30 and 31. The book's been designed with an introduction, chapter 1, verses 1 through 9, and it first of all links this book to King Solomon. Now remember the story in 1 Kings chapter 3. Solomon had asked God for wisdom to lead Israel well. And so Solomon became known as the wisest man in the ancient world. And we're told in 1 Kings chapter 4 that he wrote thousands of proverbs and poems and collected knowledge about plants and animals. So Solomon was like the fountainhead of Israel's wisdom literature. So while not all the material in this book is written by him personally, he is where Israel's wisdom tradition began. The introduction says that by reading this book, you too can gain wisdom. Now, wisdom for most of us means knowledge, but the Hebrew word chokhmah means much more than just mental activity. It refers to action also. So think skill or applied knowledge. This is why back in the book of Exodus, chapter 31, it was artists and craftsmen in Israel who were said to have chokhmah. So the purpose of this book is to help you develop a set of practical skills for living well in God's world. And this gets linked with another key idea in the introduction, the fear of the Lord. Now, fear here is not about terror. It's about a healthy sense of reverence and awe for God and about my place in the universe. It's a moral mindset that recognizes I am not God and that I don't get to make up my own definitions of good and evil and right and wrong. Rather, I need to humble myself before God and embrace God's definition of right and wrong, even when that's inconvenient for me. Now, this introduction leads us into the first main section of the book, chapters 1 through 9, which also doesn't contain short one-liner proverbs. Rather, what we find here are 10 speeches from a father to a son about how the son should listen to wisdom and cultivate the fear of the Lord and live accordingly, which means a life of virtue and integrity and generosity, all of which lead to success and peace. The father warns his son also about folly and evil and stupid decisions that will breed selfishness and pride, all leading to ruin and shame. And so the son should make the pursuit of wisdom and the fear of the Lord his highest goal in life. And this way of thinking, it forms the moral logic of this entire book. Now, these speeches from the father also clue us into what biblical wisdom literature is and how it's different from other parts of the Bible. These books explore how to live well in God's world, but wisdom is not the same as law, like what Moses gave Israel at Mount Sinai. And it's not the same as prophecy, divine speech to God's people. Rather, wisdom literature has the accumulated insight of God's people through the generations about how to live in a way that honors God and others. And so, through the book of Proverbs now, these human words about wisdom have been put together as God's word and wisdom to his people, which connects to the other thing you find in chapters 1 through 9. There are 4 poems from Lady Wisdom. Here, wisdom has been poetically personified as a woman who calls out to humanity to pay attention and to seek her. Wisdom says that she is woven into the fabric of the universe, and so wherever you see people making wise decisions, they are relying on her. So you see someone being generous or having sexual integrity or upholding justice. They are drawing on wisdom. These Lady Wisdom poems, they're a creative, poetic way of exploring this idea that we live in God's moral universe. and that goodness and justice are objective realities that we ignore to our own peril. And so fearing the Lord, living wisely, it's living along the grain of the universe. Now together, these two sets of speeches from the Father and Lady Wisdom, they make a powerful claim about this book, that you're not simply reading good advice, you're reading God's own invitation to learn wisdom from previous generations. And so in the next section of the book, chapters 10 through 29, we find hundreds of ancient proverbs, and they apply wisdom and the fear of the Lord to every life topic you could imagine: family, work, neighborhood, friendship, sex, marriage, money, anger, forgiveness, alcohol, debt, everything. And these are all filtered through the value system of Proverbs 1 through 9. Now, these Proverbs, they're all pretty short. They're easy to memorize. And actually, this section of the book is meant to become a reference work that you return to time and time again throughout the years, which raises some important issues in learning how to read these Proverbs. First of all, Proverbs are by nature about probabilities. So you fear the Lord and you make wise, good choices, things will likely go well for you. And if you don't fear the Lord, you're foolish, your life will likely not go so well. Now, that is all often true, but not always. Which leads to the next point, that Proverbs are not promises. They're not formulas for success. So, some Proverbs, for example: the fear of the Lord prolongs your life, but the years of the wicked are cut short. Or, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't turn from it. So yes, fearing God, being a moral person, will most likely lead to a better, longer life, and raising your kids in a stable, loving home does set them up well, but there are no guarantees. Lots of things can and often do go wrong in our world. And so lastly, Proverbs by nature focus on the general rule, but not the exceptions, which are many. And the wisdom books actually aren't ignorant of that. The exceptions are what the other wisdom books, Job and Ecclesiastes, are all about. And together, these acknowledge that life is too complex for simple formulas, which is why we need all of the wisdom books together to get the bigger picture. This all leads to the final section of the book, two large collections of poems. First, poems from a man named Agur, who begins by acknowledging his own ignorance and folly and his great need for God's wisdom. And then Agur discovers that divine wisdom has been given to him in the scriptures, which teach him how to live well. And so Agur is put before us as like a model reader of the book of Proverbs, somebody who's always open to hearing God's wisdom through the scriptures. The final poems are connected to a man named Lemuel. He's a non-Israelite king, and he passes on the wisdom that was given to him by his mom. It's guidance for being a wise and just leader. And then the final poem is an acrostic or an alphabet poem where each line begins with a new letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And the entire poem's about the woman of noble character. It depicts a woman who lives according to the wisdom of Proverbs and stands like a model of someone who takes God's wisdom and then translates it into practical decisions in everyday life, at work or at home, in her family and in her community. So the book opened with words from a father to a son about listening to Lady Wisdom, and so now the book closes by offering the words of a mother to her son about a woman who lives wisely. The book of Proverbs is for every person in every season of life. It's a guide for living wisely and well in God's good world. And that's what the book of Proverbs is all about.
Thank you, Dick. So 4 takeaways from that video, and that's why you should always sit closer. I have no sympathy for you at all, sitting this far back. You get what you deserve, and the book of Proverbs will reinforce that over the coming weeks. 4 things to take away, though. The book of Proverbs, it's a guide for living well in God's world. And that's what the book gives us, right? Proverbs are not promises. That's a key element. One of the biggest things that we run into as believers is a disappointment with God. And that disappointment is rooted in our own misunderstandings of how God presents himself. You and I set ourselves up for such unrealistic outcomes, right? So as a 12-year-old boy, hey, I was taught and believed, you do right, you live right, God does right by you. And that was great until my mom came down with cancer. And 6 months later, despite the fact that she was the most godly person ever to live on the face of the earth, outside of Jesus and Joseph, she dies. And that ran in the face of everything that everyone around me was still confident of. Her siblings didn't come and visit her until the bitter end because they were confident God would heal her. She's not going to die. And you can see how, hey, in each of our lives, you can set yourself up for a disappointment that God never intended for you to have that expectation. Proverbs aren't promises. Focus on the general rule, not the exceptions. And the biggest proof of that is, right, the book of Job. Right? You and I have this expectation, righteous living, everything works out great. And the book of Job does what to that? Well, it blows it up. Right? It starts out great, and then in 3 days, the guy loses everything, even though he's clearly declared to be the most righteous guy to ever walk the face of the earth. Third thing, fear of God and wisdom, things go great. That is the general message of the book. And the other message is no fear of God and foolishness, and things will go poorly. Right? Train wreck lives are never a shocking surprise. Most train wreck lives you can see, you can anticipate. Right? It's unfolding. Hey, when we get word that some Hollywood celebrity is dead at the age of 27, that's not exactly staggering, shocking news. Live like a fool, die like a fool. Right? That you and I expect. So that's the book of Proverbs, and that's what we're going to be looking at for the next several weeks. And keep in mind, right, just as the guy showed, hey, we're not going to actually get to a proverb until chapter 10. First 9 chapters are written in almost an epistolary format. It's not until you get to chapter 10 that you begin these pithy statements, right? And that's what makes the book of Proverbs kind of frustrating is, the subject matter of chapter 10, verse 7 may be the tongue, and verse 8 might be slothfulness. And if you're like me, I like to see connection. Well, trying to connect those dots takes a lot of gymnastics, right? But there is a method to the madness. We'll talk about it when we get to those topics. By way of today, we're going to try and look at verses 8 through 33 of chapter 1. And it sounds lengthy, but it's not. I want you to think on these terms with me. Where do we find warnings? This is the participatory part of the class. Where do we find warnings? Yeah, on a blender, there's that great warning. Don't stick your hand in it. Right? Where else do we find warnings? On a hair dryer, don't put this in the shower with you. On a road, bridges ice before the road does, right? Now think about all those 3 things, and although they're varied and very different, right, you can surmise some conclusions about, in general, we find warnings where what exists. Man, you guys are geniuses. That's exactly right. Right? Pete Delkus and every other weatherman comes on 4 hours before, right? The first cloud is even in the Metroplex. But he doesn't come 4 weeks before. He's going to tell you 4 weeks before, right? But the weather's going to change so much it never gets here. Right? But there has to be imminent presence of a dangerous situation that warrants a warning. Here's the imminent situation that warrants a warning for you and I. Everyday life. Right? In the New Testament, hey, the teaching of Peter is this. You and I should be diligent. We should be on guard. Why? Because Satan, like a roaring lion, is seeking whom he might devour. He doesn't do that just in the month of January or June, right? He doesn't do that on odd-numbered days. He does it every day. And the fact of the matter is, you and I live out our lives, or we should live out our lives, mindful. Man, today could be a disastrous day. I better be on guard. I better be on watch. I better be in tune. With that in mind, we come to chapter 1. Here's how the passage breaks down. Verses 8 and 9, an invitation. We'll see it. It's obvious. It's clear. Verses 10 through 31, the heart of the passage is the issue. And the issue is going to be simple. He's going to frame it in the context of just 2 items. It's amazing how few choices in life you actually have. There is the right path and there is the wrong path. And there's only one way on the right path. Hey, there's a bazillion routes on the wrong path. It doesn't matter which one. They're all equally bad choices. They all end result in the same thing. But there's, in the end, only really 2. You either go the right way or the wrong way. And then the verses 32 and 33 talk about the impact. And that's kind of you can fall asleep until we get to 32, 33. And then I'll wake you up, kind of remind you this is what it's all about. So the passage, it starts with an invitation. Look at verses 8 and 9, chapter 1 of the book of Proverbs. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Indeed, they are a graceful wreath to your head and ornaments about your neck. Now, when you read that, what basic assumption is made about the content that's being offered? What does the writer assume about you and I as we encounter this? Okay, right? And the assumption on some level is you and I are interested in listening. We are interested in getting that gift, that wreath, that ornament. There is, on some level, you and I have a predisposition that if there's a choice between a good and a bad life, we've kind of reached a conclusion that we would like. There you go. There you go. Hey, now to be certain, right? There are people out there who have no desire for a good life. Right? I mean, that individual who goes into a schoolhouse with a gun and wipes out 27 people, he had a premeditated desire to have a bad outcome. There was no confusion on his part that, hey, this will be a good day. Right? But the writer is going to assume that you and I are all of sound mind and judgment, and we're kind of nice people who want nice things. Right? That's a nice thing. What does the writer invite us to do in verse 8? Hear, listen, right? And the difficult thing, heed. Right? And it becomes obvious in this, hey, that on some level, wisdom is not hidden. Right? He doesn't say decipher, decode. It's not a matter of you and I figuring out some hidden mystery. that this essence of living a good life, living a godly life, and guess what? They're one and the same. Hey, this doesn't really require a magic decoder ring or a special study Bible or a degree from seminary. It's pretty readily available. Here it is. And the benefit to heeding this invitation, the likely outcome is what? Yeah, a graceful wreath, ornaments. Hey, he's talking about success and beauty and value. Nothing could be more American than those three things. That's the American dream. We want success. We would love it to be beautiful, and we would love for it to have value. That's the invitation. And the reality is, who doesn't want that? Right? If a salesman walks in and says, "Hey, I'm offering you nothing but a great life. Sign me up." Do I pay it in installments? How many years are you offering? Right? So if the offer is that obvious, what's the problem? What's the issue? Well, he forms the issue for us in two steps in verses 10 through 31. And he does so by offering a stark contrast in two pictures. The first picture, verses 10 through 19. Look what he says. "My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, 'Come with us,' let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, even whole as those who go down to the pit. We will find all kinds of precious wealth. We will fill our houses with spoil. Throw in your lot with us. We shall all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your feet from their path, for their feet run to evil, and they hasten to shed blood. Indeed, it's useless to spread the baited net in the sight of any bird. But they lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush their own lives. So are the ways of everyone who gains by violence. It takes away the life of its possessions." Verse 10, he brings to our mind a scenario. What's the scenario in verse 10? Temptation, right? And it's not temptation on a subtle level, on a cloaked level, on a veiled level. It's temptation of what level? How does he phrase it? If sinners, and he's telling us, right, hey, when someone gets described as a sinner, right, well, you conjure up in your mind an image, don't you? They probably got a beard, tattoo. They got spaces in their teeth from the meth, right? They haven't showered in a while. There's a vomit on their jacket from where they threw up after being drunk and inebriated. Right? I don't know how you depict sinner in your mind, but you've that term, right? He doesn't say if your next door neighbor, right? If your mother-in-law, right? Those people, they're sinners. But he says, hey, if sinners, right? What general piece of advice does he give us? If these sinners seek to entice you, to draw you down a path, what's the great bit of wisdom that he tells you? Take a different path. When that stranger pulls up and says, hey, why don't you get in the van with us, and smoke is coming out of the van, not because they got a bad engine, the writer of Proverbs is suggesting what? Don't get in the van. Don't get it. Like you needed someone to tell you that. right? You know, we tell our kids from the beginning of life, don't talk to strangers, don't take candy from strangers. And the writer of Proverbs comes here and says, hey, listen, if sinners entice you, do not consent. Look at the language he uses in 11 through 14. Just read that real quickly as I get up here to get my drink and wet my whistle. You look at the language he uses in 11 through 14, and let me ask you this question. I got to find my question. Is that what anyone that you know would say? In all of your lives of temptation, and you've all been tempted and you've all failed miserably, do any of you recall having that conversation? No, right? You remember the show Let's Make a Deal? The whole premise of the show was this. You can't tell on the surface whether you're about to make a good deal or a bad deal. All three curtains looked the same. Every box they brought down and offered you had a nice pretty bow on it. They all looked equally good. You had to somehow ascertain, are they trying to trick me or are they trying to help me? You had to exercise some element of discernment. And on that show, well, there was absolutely no rhyme or reason. You were just guessing. Let me submit, that's how most people live life. They're just guessing. They're just hoping to luck out. They're not processing the message that the world gives, because the message that the world gives never comes in this form. If someone came to you today and said, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without cause, let us swallow them alive like Sheol, I would hope that you would all, I already have plans after church. There's a shower down in the fellowship hall I've got to go to. I'm not going to be able to join you today. If that's not the language that you and I encounter, why does the writer say that that's what they say? Well, why does the writer choose to relate it in those types of terms? You do know. You know exactly, right? Hey, you're dead right. Hey, he simply undresses it. Hey, you ever heard of this concept called marketing? Right? Every movie, every song, every commercial, every billboard makes everything about this world seem good and enticing and desirable. And the writer of Proverbs, he just strips it away to say, hey, here's the real message. Here's the real deal. Hey, do you realize that on April 15th, you don't have to pay taxes? You don't have to. But the reality is this. Hey, if enough of us don't, someone's going to come knocking on our doors very quickly. Right? And every tax evasive scheme ends up being that reality. Has as its basic message, you don't have to pay taxes. And then they give you a lie as to why you don't, but it's still a lie. Hey, the writer is simply letting us know, hey, listen, it may come under a different guise, under a different look, but in reality, here's what the world is offering you. Come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent, let us swallow them alive. situations like that often, right, are communicated in a much more enticing, desirable way. Verse 13, what's promised as a result of joining them. If you somehow in a weak moment decide, hey, yeah, I'd like that plan. I'm gonna hook up with these people. In verse 13, right? What's promised? What are they offering? We will find all kinds of precious wealth. We'll fill our houses with spoil. The justification offered in verse 14 is what? Hey, we're all in it together. Right? It's becoming the mantra of America. Right? We are all in this together. We all deserve the same thing. And you know what? If we all unite, they have to give it to us. It's great to be an American. Verse 15 is a restatement of what? He's going to say, my son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your feet from their path. Where did we just hear that? That was verse 10. In verse 16, what does the writer say is the end result of this approach to life? Do they end up with wealth? Do they end up with prosperity? Verse 16, for their feet run to evil, and they hasten to shed blood. Right? That's where that goes. That's the end result. No one can put that out there, right, as, hey, this is why you should follow us. This is why you should join in with us. Because, again, that's not the outcome that any of us are looking for in life. He paints a picture for us in verse 17. It is useless to spread the baited net in the sight of any bird. Right? I'm not a hunter. I'm not a trapper. But basically, he's making this observation. Hey, that even the dumb bird, if he sees you rigging the trap, knows what? Don't go near the trap. And he says that because he wants to make this point. You and I aren't that smart. Because look at what he says in the very next verse. But they, talking about those who sought to entice you, they lie in wait. They lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush their own lives. Right? That's what all of us have now lived long enough to observe. Right? There was a time and season in each of our lives where it seemed like the wicked indeed prosper. Right? There were all sorts of people in their teen years and in their early 20s and even 30s took massive shortcuts and seemed to be living high in the hog, way out in front of the game. And lo and behold, live long enough, right? And what do you find out? What do you see? It catches up. Right? There is a reason why the path to success takes discipline, takes some element of saying no to certain things, denial. Right? They lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush their own lives. And the ultimate eventual outcome of their pursuits, according to verse 19, so are the ways of everyone who gains by violence. It takes away the life of its possessors. I don't know of a single drug cartel that has a pension plan. Why do you think that is? They don't live long enough to collect on it. Hey, to be sure, in your 30s and 40s, being a gangster is a pretty good life. There's a time, right? It's the whole problem of a king of the hill approach to life. Remember playing that game as a kid? There's a hill. Only one person can be on the top. The objective of the game, be on top. And you finally fight your way, and you're on top. The problem is what? All the other kids trying to play the game now want to knock you off. King is a great job, just terrible retirement plan. Because the only way you get out of the job is dying. Right? He's going to say the same thing about wickedness. Same thing about sin. Same thing about evil. Hey, there is a season in which it looks like this is the way to go. But it has a very short and abrupt end. That's the first picture. That's one path, one option. Verses 20 through 31, we're given a second option. Look what happens, verse 20. Wisdom shouts in the street. She lifts her voice in the square. At the head of the noisy street, she cries out. At the entrance of the gates in the city, she utters her sayings. How long, O naive ones, will you love being simple-minded, and scoffers delight themselves in scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? Turn to my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make my words known to you, because I called and you refused. I stretched out my hand and no one paid attention, and you neglected all my counsel and did not want my reproof. I will also laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your dread comes. When your dread comes like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind. When distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call on me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. They would not accept my counsel. They spurned all my reproof. So they shall eat of the fruit of their own way and be satiated with their own devices. Wisdom makes me look gentle. That's scathing. If that doesn't scare you, upset you, you didn't read it right. Who appears in verse 20 and 21? It's no longer sinners. Who's the speaker now? Wisdom. And wisdom is not shy. Wisdom is not bashful. Wisdom is not in a trench coat standing over in the dark shadow of the alley saying, hey, come over here, I got a deal for you. Wisdom is pictured how? Out in the open. Doing what? Shouting. Right? Hey, wisdom is there in the street, in the square, right by the courthouse. Right in the wide open. You can't miss her. And she is shouting. She is screaming. You know why? Right? You know why most parents shout and scream. It's not because parents don't shout and scream because they're angry. They shout and scream because they're afraid. They remember what they were like as a teenager, and they're afraid that their kid is about to make the same stupid mistake they made. It's not anger, it's fear. Wisdom's not afraid. Wisdom's not angry. You know why wisdom is shouting? Because wisdom is shouting because in verse 21, she stands at the head of the noisy streets. Hey, sometimes you have to shout because in the midst of a room, it's the only way that you can be heard. Do you realize how many voices there are speaking in our world today? I grew up in a great time in which, hey, you know what? In the town I grew up in, there were many voices with one message. What my parents were telling me is what the neighbors were telling their kids, what the school teachers were telling their kids, what the Sunday school teachers were. Everywhere I went, my backside was fair game. because everybody had the same rule. And if I messed up over at Chris Mullins' house, Chris Mullins' mom spanked me and made me go home and tell my mom that she had to spank me. And for some idiotic reason, I did. And I got spanked again. And then when Dad came home, she told him what I did, and I got spanked again. It was like, people, what is wrong with this? Right? Today, you and I don't live in that kind of world. You have no idea what your neighbors are telling their kids. And our school teachers, man, right? Hey, the streets are noisy, and yet wisdom is shouting. And wisdom is shouting in verse 22, shouting to three different groups: the naive ones, scoffers, and the fools. And we're going to see them throughout the book of Proverbs. Those three groups are going to show up throughout the book of Proverbs: naive ones, simpletons, scorners, fools. And the promise that wisdom makes is in verse 23. Turn to my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make my words known to you. Hey, in and of yourself, you don't have the means to figure out life. Jeremiah will say the heart is what? Deceitful, desperately wicked. If your approach to life is, I'm just going to follow my heart, you're an idiot. And your life is going to end in disaster because your heart is the problem. And when you think that you're the solution, you're a real big idiot. Wisdom says, hey, you turn to my reproof. You look to me. You heed my invitation. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pour out my spirit on you. I'll make my words known to you. He presents for us a scenario in verses 24 and 25. I called, and you and I did what? Refused. I stretched out my hand, and you and I did what? Paid no attention. You neglected all my counsel. You didn't want my reproof. Hey, I don't care who you are. At some point in your life, more than once, you said this: I can handle this on my own. I know what I'm doing. I hear you. I know what you're telling me. I get it. But I know better. It may not work out entirely the way I want, but you know what? I'll be okay. Just leave me alone. Does that appear to be common or uncommon? Common. Very common. It's the rule. It's not the exception. The vast majority of people follow that path, take that tact, live out that strategy. It's what's presented as normal. It's not an isolated incident. According to verses 26 and 27, what inevitably comes to those who spurn wisdom? Calamity. Shocker. At some point, there's a train wreck. Right? And he makes it clear that calamity often comes how? Rather abruptly. Everything's going along great. Everything is just as good and wonderful. I'm not a fan of Downton Abbey. Anyone familiar with that show? Right, there's one scene, the car is going down the road, and out of nowhere comes what? No, is that what happened? I don't know. One of the main characters gets knocked off in a car wreck. Just like no one sees it coming, it's just over. Hey, do you realize that's a common story? There's all sorts of folks who are just bebopping along through life, and out of nowhere, boom, reality hits. And when that moment comes, what does wisdom say is going to happen in verse 28? What does that person now suddenly want? They want help. They want wisdom. Right? It's this incredible revival moment. Save me. Help me. Get me out of this. And shockingly, because we're reading God's word, what happens? What does wisdom say? No. Ooh, man. Man. Yeah, I thought there's this thing called grace. I thought, right, as long as you and I have breath, there's time. Well, here's the good news. There is. You can always return. There is no such thing as the point of no return. Here, unfortunately, is what is also true. There is no such thing as the point of no regret. You and I can set in motion events, circumstances, conditions that the outcome is going to be tragic, and there is absolutely nothing that anyone can do. As much as you desperately want to fix it, right? To put it all back in the Pandora's box. Can't happen. There are consequences that begin to unfold that you cannot minimize, condense, or avoid. You can return, but you can't turn to wisdom just moments before impact and hope to avoid the regret. That's what wisdom is saying. Look, it starts with the invitation, hear, don't forsake. We're given the issue in these two contrasts. And now look at how this thing ends in verses 32 and 33. And with this, we got to go. The waywardness of the naive will kill them. The complacency of fools will destroy them. But he who listens to me shall live securely and will be at ease from the dread of evil. What is it that characterizes the mistake of the naive and the fool? Waywardness. Right? The lie out in our world today is this. How you live doesn't really matter. There's lots of ways to do life. That's a recurring message and theme. There are lots of ways to do life. You don't have to be male or female. There's lots of genders, 26, 28, how many ever, right? You don't have to be involved in a heterosexual relationship. There's all sorts of ways. Waywardness. The second mistake area, complacency. The myth, the lie that says, I've got plenty of time to figure it out. I've got lots of opportunities to get it right. So I failed last week. I'll do better this week. And if not this week, next month, next year. I'm still young. How does their journey end? The waywardness of the naive will kill them. The complacency of fools will destroy them. And in stark contrast, what awaits those who listen to wisdom? He who listens to me shall live securely and will be at ease from the dread of evil. Hey, you know what the best part of being a 60-year-old is? Quiet. Going to bed at night, putting my head on the pillow, and the only thing I hear is my CPAP machine and Sherry snoring. And that's a great life. You go back and read Psalm 127, read Psalm 128. The things that you thought you wanted in life at 20, somewhere along the way you figure out that's not what life is all about. And you wake up one day, 50, 60, 70, enjoying things that you didn't even know were possible these great gifts that come. He says this in verse 8, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction. Do not forsake your mother's teaching. Indeed, they are a graceful wreath to your head, ornaments about your neck." Let's pray. Father, thank you for your goodness and your grace and your word. And thank you for your people. And I pray that we might hear your voice and that we might follow you. For it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.